Good evening.
Welcome to the Thursday, February 11th, 216, although your agenda may say 15. It's actually 216, meeting of the Community Oversight Advisory Board. To let you know, Abel Gordley is participating remotely, but will send her votes in to Amy. Dr. Moreland and Dr. I want to say Marion, and she's Myron. Will be absent tonight. Excused absences. They are Dr. Moreland Kapua is receiving an award tonight at the Oregon Historical Society. So one of the things that's come up, and this is just to mention this, this is not an attempt at resolution, but we have been asked if there is available an audio recording of the settlement agreement. And we are investigating what the possibilities are. It sounds simple, but it's not. So we'll be looking to see what we can or cannot do, or how we might be able to manage all that kind of a translation from text to audio. So let you know also that the Cocal office will be moving, and we've been living with the Office of Equity down in the Commonwealth Building on Southwest 6th. We will soon be at our new home, which is at 525 Northeast Oregon. Actually, it's right down the street. And we should be in there, we're hoping, by the end of February. Okay. We're going to have an open house too, so watch for that. And you are welcome to come to the office and talk to people and see what we're doing. Mandy may have some things to share with us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Just a few small announcements, the ones that I typically make. I think you're all probably, well, I shouldn't say that, but if you haven't been here before, our emergency exits are actually pretty clearly marked in here, but if you were to go out either of these doors, there's a back door that will lead us out into, I think, a parking lot, or you can also go straight through this door and to the left, and you'll be able to exit. Restrooms are just immediately down the hall, right off to the left as you exit this room. We do have toys available this evening. Hopefully they'll be occupied by one Mr. Alex, who is here with us tonight, Amy Ruiz's son. And I also wanted to let people know who are watching at home or watching via the live stream, we do have childcare available upon request. We do need 10 days advance notice before any meeting to do it, but you're more than welcome to call me at 503-823-5149, and I'm happy to arrange that for you. And I don't see Brad Taylor here yet. He is our mental health specialist. He might be here tonight, and he is here to support all of us in any kind of needs that we might have or special accommodations. So typically I announce that when Brad is here. And I think that is it for me. Thank you.
Okay. So welcome. Glad you're here. I don't know if I should say, I hope you enjoy yourselves, but I do hope that you will find us worth listening to. So one of the first order of businesses this evening is the filling of the vacancy left on the executive committee when Senator Gordley resigned from that committee. She remains a COAB member and remains active on the mental health subcommittee. The original formation of the executive committee, the seat designated, the seat that she vacated is designated for one of the 5 members appointed by the city council. Of the 4 remaining members, Rabbi Kahana is interested in serving on that committee. The other 3 members were polled and chose not to serve. So what we need to hear tonight is, Rabbi Kahana, something from you on why you'd like to serve on that committee, and then we'll take any little discussion and then a vote.
I didn't know I was doing that.
Surprise.
Surprise. Aside from the fact that there doesn't seem to be anyone else, so I was the last choice. No, I'm honored. I think that as an organization, we've spent a lot of time trying to deal with how we organize ourselves and govern ourselves, and the executive committee, I think, has done some excellent work, and I'm very pleased and proud of the work that's been done, and would love to be a part of that.
Any questions for Rabbi Kahana? Any comments? Okay.
Yeah, I'd say we'd move to a vote.
Is that your motion, Philip?
Second.
Yes.
Going to get a second from V? Okay. I'd like to call the roll, except I don't see it up there, so I guess I better go back here and get this page. On voting for Rabbi Kahana to fill the vacant seat on the COAB Executive Committee. Kahana.
No, I mean, abstain. Obviously abstain.
Is Siadam here?
She is running late.
Okay, so is Catherine, incidentally. Bud.
Aye.
Catherine. Avel. Aye. Jimmy.
Aye.
Apologize for all the
Ime.
misery.
Aye.
Laquita.
This year's gonna be
Aye.
better.
V.
Aye.
Rochelle.
Aye.
Tom.
Aye.
Philip.
Answer is pretty obvious. Yes. He's amazing. We need him.
All right, then there are no abstentions and no votes. It's a one abstention, and you're unanimously elected to serve on the executive committee. Thank you.
Welcome to our team.
Excuse me.
Honored.
So we're going to start out with policy recommendations tonight, the ones from the Use of Force Subcommittee that has worked so hard to generate all of these recommendations. We're going to do as many as we can by 6:45. I'm going to be fairly stringent about time. I'm going to reduce the 3 minutes of public testimony on any particular or specific recommendation down to 2. Okay? And that's all in the interest of time and moving through as many of these recommendations as possible. Did we find the missing sheet of paper?
Yeah.
Did we find the missing sign-up sheet? Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at, okay. So, let's start with the first one. Okay, so to call your attention to the recommendation on aerosol restraints, that's been pulled back into subcommittee for rediscussion and reworking. So we're going to start with the one after that, which is 111215-4, revised Directive 1050, less lethal weapons and munitions to clarify when the use of beanbag shotguns is authorized. And I'm going to read you the full text of the recommendation. A beanbag shotgun is a weapon. Directive 1050 should be revised to clarify when the use of the beanbag shotgun is authorized and to include at least the following. The optimal distance for a beanbag shotgun is between 21 and 50 feet. Accuracy drops off rapidly after approximately 45 feet, and their flight becomes erratic, striking objects to the right, left, or below the target, increasing the risk to innocent bystanders. Officers are cautioned that beanbag rounds present a significant risk of death or physical injury when fired at less than 21 to 30 feet at the chest, head, neck, or groin. Officers should be aware that targeting the chest, head, neck, or groin has on occasion proved deadly proven deadly when a beanbag round is fired at a close range of 21 to 30 feet. Officers are further cautioned that the target areas for a beanbag round substantially differs from a deadly force target area. Instead of aiming for the center mass of the body, beanbag shotguns must be aimed at the lower abdomen below the belt level, thighs, legs below the knee, or arms below the elbow, forearms. The chest, head, neck, and groin should not be targeted. Officers shall consider the risk of the beanbag round causing serious harm when determining whether to fire the beanbag shotgun. Before resorting to the use of a beanbag shotgun, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them to avoid the use of such force. Beanbag rounds are only authorized when used on an individual engaged in aggressive resistance or aggravated resistance as defined in Directive 1010, use of force, and only to prevent immediate physical harm to the officer or another person. In addition, each firing of a beanbag shotgun must be objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportionate to the threat of resistance encountered as required by Directive 1010. Use of beanbag rounds in the following circumstances is only authorized in situations where there is a risk of death or serious physical injury to the officer or third parties. A, when the suspect is in an elevated position where a fall is likely to cause substantial injury or death. B, when the suspect is in a location where the suspect could drown. C, when the suspect is operating a motor vehicle or motorcycle and the engine is running or is on a bicycle or scooter in motion. D, when an individual is handcuffed or otherwise restrained. E, when an individual is fully contained in a police vehicle. Unless it would present a danger to the officer or others, officers shall issue a verbal warning or attempt to utilize hand signals where there is a language barrier or the subject is hearing impaired. And I think we changed that language last time to deaf. Prior to firing a beanbag shotgun, officers shall give the subject sufficient time to comply with the warning before deploying the taser. Whoop, what happened here? The shotgun. A warning shall be given prior to each beanbag round that is fired. Officers shall not target the chest, head, neck, or groin unless deadly force is justified. Beanbag rounds should not be shot through glass or a chain link fence due to the likelihood of rupturing the beanbags and having the contents injure others. Officers are prohibited from using beanbag rounds against an individual in a crowd unless the officer has the approval of a supervisor and can, 1, target a specific individual who poses an immediate threat of causing physical harm, and reasonably assure that other individuals in the crowd who pose no threat of violence will not be struck by the weapon. Officers shall summon emergency medical services for all subjects who have been struck by a beanbag round. The PPB shall enact a policy which ensures that only less lethal beanbag rounds as opposed to lethal live rounds can be fired from a beanbag shotgun. The PPB shall enact a policy which ensures all shotguns, including beanbag shotguns, are included in a secure manner. Officers shall be certified on the use of beanbag shotguns. Officers shall receive annual beanbag shotgun in-service training, including proficiency and policy changes, if any. In addition to these policy provisions, the subcommittee is concerned about the current use of a shotgun for beanbag rounds that can also be loaded with live rounds. Despite precautions being taken by the PPB to ensure that live rounds are not mistakenly loaded into a shotgun intended for beanbag rounds, that is not enough. The PPB should replace its current beanbag shotguns with shotguns that can only fire beanbag rounds. Tom, did you want to comment on this or have something to say?
The recommendation was a product of the subcommittee's work, primarily in this instance taking the DOJ-approved best practices from the Seattle Police Department and also incorporating the 2009 Park Report. The only comment, so to speak, from the police advisors is an assertion that the current policy and related training is consistent with the Seattle policy that this recommendation incorporates. So there's really no opposition. We think it's represents best practices. It's a comprehensive suggestion as to how to rewrite the current policy.
I have one person signed up for public comment. That's Dan Handelman. Or does anybody want to ask Tom any questions before we get to Dan?
Can I ask?
Yes, we. And then Philip.
So, Tom, I'm curious. Under E, it says officers shall summon emergency medical services for all subjects who have been struck by a beanbag round. Now, I just simply don't know, but does that mean, or is there an inference in there about that happening as reasonably as soon as possible?
Yes?
Okay, so that's not something I need to add in terms of a friendly amendment or anything. Okay, thank you.
Philip.
Thank you, Tom. I've got a question for you, though, and it's just something that I just thought of now. And on page 68, where it mentions the officer should be certified. And I'm wondering, certified actually made me wonder, because I did take the police training with target shooting, target practice, and they had the target up there of a person, you know, the outline of a person, the shape of a person. It had the different rings, the ranges that you could hit. There was a red bullseye for the heart kind of thing. And I'm wondering if the certified through training, if they're targeting the heart, or what would that training look like? If they're targeting the arm or the leg, I'm wondering, can you explain what the certification for that might be, what that would look like? And other than that, I've got no complaints. That one idea of the certification part made me wonder.
Well, all certification and training should be consistent with the policy. The subcommittee has not reviewed the specific training or certification on the beanbag, but it should be consistent with the policy.
Paul.
I can speak to that. The training does not use that target. The only time that it does, it would be aiming at the lower, there's a lower line way at the bottom, about where the belt line would be. The certification course is actually done on a silhouette that has, that is painted with the target zones that we have, which are, again, consistent with what Seattle says, below the elbow. The knees are secondary, as well as the elbows are secondary. Green zones would be below the elbow. Hands and feet are white because they're situational, not primary target areas. Thighs, belt line area, buttocks, areas where there have been no confirmed deaths associated in the U.S. are the areas that we're showing as primary. Secondary areas would be, again, above the elbow, on the arm, but the genitalia, the spinal column, the chest area, the heart, the head, the neck, all of those are negative impact areas. So the training is consistent with the policy, as well as with Seattle's just signed off on policy. There are a few things in here that are a little more restrictive, but yes. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Paul. It's good to know.
Rabbi Kahana, then Bud, and then we're going to get to the public input.
Thanks, Tom. Small question, but on the third paragraph from the bottom, the fourth to the last word, what I think included was not the correct word. Do you know what that is supposed to be? Well, the tasers as well, I think we know. Right.
Yes.
But,
yes.
But there's another place.
no, this is another place. Third paragraph from the bottom.
What page?
168, 68, sorry. PPP shall enact a policy which ensures all shotguns, including beanbag shotguns, are included in a secure manner. I don't think included was what was intended.
I'm sorry, I'm not finding your reference.
Page 68,
Third paragraph.
third paragraph from the bottom. PPP shall enact a policy which ensures all shotguns.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Including beanbag shotguns are included in a secure manner. Is included the word you intended, that was intended there?
Secured.
Secured, that's what I would have thought. Thank you. Oh, secured in a secured manner? Probably means stored.
Stored?
Stored.
Whatever.
Thanks.
But
This question is actually probably more for Paul or any other one of the police advisors. So in a number of these recommendations, we often see this con statement that says training already incorporates the change that's being contemplated here. Which, you know, it's great that we're already training to the Seattle standard, but how does that happen? How do we get into a situation where we're training to one thing and yet the documented policies and procedures seem to be out of sync with that? What's going on there?
So when we look at the policy, what spot are you talking about that's not consistent when you look at our policy?
So right now, the policy and procedure on the books is not consistent with what Tom is bringing up as far as the Seattle procedure. And yet, in the cons, you're saying we already trained to this standard. So I'm trying to understand, what is that telling me? Is it telling me that we have a gap between our current training and policy and procedure? Or what is going on there? Why do we find that we're training to one thing and the policy seems to say another?
Well, the policy more is an administrative policy. To put the entire lesson plan into the policy, it would be pages and pages and pages and pages long. So the policy, again, it talks about deployment, it talks a little bit about the ammunition, it talks about medical treatment, it talks about verbal warnings. The training now is where we go in and look at what's in the lesson plan and what exactly is being trained. And when you look at the Seattle policy, which again is very short, it's even, I think, probably the same here, and doesn't cover all of these things either. And you look at the training, we're training consistent to what Seattle is saying, as well as almost all of the things that are in here. Again, there are some things that are more restrictive even than in the Seattle policy in here that I think really inhibits what an officer can and can't do and could potentially raise the level of force that's needed. So again, do you put the entire lesson plan in the directives? I mean, I guess that's the talk that has to be had. Or do we have an administrative directive that refers to the use of force policy on how that tool will be used or that weapon will be used? And then the training, we look at that and determine if it's consistent. And it is consistent with the policy as well as Seattle's policy.
I don't think that's the question I hear, Paul.
So
Maybe I
what-
can help a little bit. There's what's happening with policy in Portland. There's the recommendations. And there's a statement somewhere that says they're essentially happening now. They are essentially the same. But the recommendations aren't the same as what is existing. Now, I don't know, is that what you're saying, Bud?
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. The recommendations are made based on existing policy, is what I understand the attempt. Okay, so whatever the policy is, somebody said, we recommend adding this or doing this or changing that. And if in fact those recommendations are already there, I think the question Bud is asking is, how is it they don't show up in the policy so that in reading the policy, you get all that information?
So I guess then what would have to, again, it's, oh, Tasha, go on, okay.
Let me take a small crack at that. So I don't know specifically about this because I didn't review the old policy, nor did I review the recommendations to see what elements of change there are. But, I mean, there are times where the laws change how we can apply things, and we change those immediately. That doesn't mean that the very next day the brand new policy comes out changed also. The policy changes take time. And now with the new procedure, which I couldn't even tell you what all the steps are, but those policies get posted. There's 30 days for public comment on them. So changing a policy doesn't happen overnight. But that doesn't mean that training doesn't change very quickly, and it also doesn't mean that what police officers are allowed to do or not allowed to do doesn't change very quickly. So I don't know, that may not answer this particular, because I don't know, but that is a potential.
Is that answer your question, Bud?
That was the answer I was looking for.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're good.
All right, now where are we? I think we have one person signed up to say something about this particular recommendation. Dan Handelman.
Good evening, COAB members. Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. These are just kind of comments. If you want to incorporate any of them in with friendly amendments, that's great. First of all, we've in the next item, you're talking about the name of tasers. Bean bags are actually not bean bags. It's referred to over and over again. They're actually bags filled with lead pellets. And that's why it says if one of them gets loose by going through a chain link fence, it could kill somebody. So just, I'm not going to argue the point. I just want to make that point so for those of you who aren't aware, it's not really a bean bag. However, this does refer to them as less lethal weapons. The OIR group in their report called them non-lethal weapons in a few places, which is not true. They are potentially lethal, which is acknowledged by this directive you're proposing. The use of beanbags in a crowd is a very scary idea. It actually has happened a couple of times. It has to be authorized by a supervisor. That's covered in the crowd control directive. So again, I don't know, you need to add this tonight into this directive, but just so you know, it's not something an officer can choose to do on their own, and I'm glad about that. Another solution to the shotgun issue is that they can stop carrying lethal shotguns, and that way they couldn't confuse which rounds they're going to be putting in there. And finally, even if this isn't policy, I believe that right now there's no warning attached to the beanbag less lethal directive as it's written. Thanks.
Thanks, Dan. Any more discussion from the COAB? Yes, Paul.
Just one last thing regarding the warning part. There is a spot directly in there in the current directive about warnings, and is pretty implicit on exactly what needs to be said, or explicit on what needs to be said. Some of the concerns that I had with some of these recommendations, one of them is on page 67, and it starts with, it's a little more than halfway down. It says, before resorting to the use of a beanbag shotgun, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation tools and techniques and tools which are available to them to avoid the use of such force. One of my concerns here is I absolutely agree with de-escalation, but putting the word shall in there says that it has to happen. Well, if the situation doesn't allow for that to happen because it is the level of resistance or the threat coming from the person that you're dealing with is so high, shall says, well, I got to try all of these things first. Well, now we might be in a shooting because I wasn't able to deploy this less lethal weapon system immediately. So again, putting the word shall in there is a mandate, and that concerns me a little bit. Again, I guess that would be the biggest one. And then a warning shall be given prior to each round that's fired. Again, I think that's a little more restrictive than what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals says. We are very clear that if feasible, warning has to be given, and we even in the directive say exactly what needs to be said. Trying to take the time in between each round to do that when the person's running at you with a knife and you're doing as many beanbag rounds to stop that from happening, but you have to pause each time to give a warning, I think is only going to raise the risk of a shooting to occur, and we don't want that to happen. The warning, absolutely. That's following the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling that we're doing that. So,
Okay, Tom.
The subcommittee has taken this position. I've repeated it, and I'll say it again. We do not feel constrained by whatever the Ninth Circuit or any other court may say. We have made recommendations based upon best practices, in this instance, primarily from Seattle, to have a policy in Portland that serves our community and protects us from excessive uses of force. And if that means giving more warnings, or if that means they shall use de-escalation techniques. The subcommittee believes that that is an important, or a series of important considerations. And we are not, as a subcommittee, being deterred by the suggestion that the law may not allow or require as much. We want people to be protected. That's why this lawsuit was filed, and that's why we're here.
Yes.
So, and I would say too, because it says officers shall consider, like the fact that shall is next to consider, to me that kind of says like, use your best judgment. Like it's not saying, like it doesn't seem like it should change anything. It's saying like that officers shall consider, and that's what you should be doing anyway, is considering what is the best way to move forward with whatever is happening. And I think when the recommendation is saying to shoot a warning round, I don't think it means like for every shot that you're going to use that you have to shoot a warning round. It means like shooting a warning round to like let them know that this is getting serious. We're gonna have to like, you know, start using bean bags. So I think using a warning round is like, or just making a shot first, I think that shouldn't be too hard to do.
I'm going to close discussion and call for the vote. We'd like to, unless there's something really burning that can be resolved here, because it sounds like, to me, like there's some opinions here, but not necessarily any way to resolve this in this setting. We have a resolution on, a recommendation on the table. Can I hear a motion for its, Philip? Bud, seconded.
I move to vote.
Okay. I'm going to call the roll. And do you understand what the recommendation is? Okay. Rabbi Kahana?
Aye.
Siadam?
Aye.
Bud?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
Abel?
She's an aye.
Jimmy?
Aye.
Ime?
Aye.
Laquita?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
V?
Abstain.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
And Philip?
Aye.
The motion passes with one abstention. The next recommendation is addressing tasers. The brief statement is, rename and revise Directives 1051, Electronic Control Weapon System, to clarify when the use of conducted electrical weapons, tasers, is authorized. See full text of recommendation attached. The full text is, rename and revise Directives 1051, Electronic Control Weapons System, to clarify when the use of conducted electrical weapons is authorized, consistent with the conducted electrical weapons policies of the Seattle Police Department and the New Orleans Police Department. The directive on the use of tasers should be renamed Conducted Electrical Weapons. The revised directive should include most, if not all, of the policy provisions found in New Orleans Police Department Chapter 1.3, Conducted Electrical Weapons, and it is attached to your package. A conducted electrical weapon, or taser, is a weapon. Directive 10051 should be rewritten to clarify when the use of the taser is authorized and include at least the following. A taser in probe deployment is designed to stimulate a portion of the nervous system with sufficient electrical energy to bring about uncontrolled muscle contractions which override an individual's voluntary motor function. Drive stun mode occurs when the taser makes direct contact with the subject's body and does not override an individual's motor response. It is intended to cause significant pain. Use of the taser in probe deployment is preferred in some circumstances over the use in drive stun mode, which can only be used at close range and may cause marks and scarring. Before resorting to the use of a taser, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them to avoid the use of such force. Officers shall use tasers only when such force is necessary to protect the officer, the subject, or another party from physical harm, and other less intrusive means would be ineffective. Tasers are only authorized to control a subject who is engaged in aggressive resistance or aggravated resistance as defined in Directive 1010, use of force, and there is a reasonable expectation that it will be unsafe for officers to approach the subject. In addition, each use of a taser must be objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportionate to the threat or resistance encountered as required by Directive 1010. Subject to Directive 1010, tasers are authorized if the subject has committed a crime of violence and is fleeing, and the person presents the potential to harm others, himself, herself, or others, harm officers, himself, herself, or others. Mere flight from a pursuing officer without known facts or circumstances is not sufficient cause for the use of a taser. In addition, the use of a taser on a fleeing subject must be objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportionate to the threat or resistance encountered as required by Directive 1010. Tasers are not authorized to control a subject who is only passively resistant or actively resistant as defined in Directive 1010. This is quite a bit. Tasers are intended to control an aggressively resisting individual while minimizing the risk of serious injury. Officers shall determine the reasonableness of taser use based on the facts or circumstances known to the officer at the time, including but not limited to the subject's age, size, physical condition, and the feasibility of lesser force symptoms. Lesser force options. Use of a taser in the following circumstances is only authorized in situations where there is a risk of death or serious physical injury to the officer or third parties. A, when the suspect is in an elevated position where a fall is likely to cause substantial injury or death. B, when the suspect is in a location where the suspect could drown. C, when the suspect is operating a motor vehicle or motorcycle and the engine is running or is on a bicycle or scooter in motion. D, when an individual is handcuffed or otherwise restrained. When an individual is fully contained in a police vehicle. There's a footnote for D. There's at least one member of the work group and possibly community members that do not favor the taser being used on someone who is in handcuffs or restrained under any circumstances. The subcommittee expects further discussion on this issue at the meeting. Unless it would present a danger to the officer or others, officers shall issue a verbal warning or attempt to utilize hand signals when there's a language barrier or the subject is deaf prior to deploying a taser. Officers shall give the subject sufficient time to comply with the warning before deploying the taser. A warning shall be given prior to each deployment of a taser. Officers shall not target a subject's head, neck, chest, heart, or genital area. The center mass of the back to the buttocks is a viable target. Officers shall target below the rib cage down to the upper thighs, splitting the belt line if possible. When encountering subjects wearing heavy or loose clothing on the upper body, the legs should be considered as targets. The use of tasers for pain compliance against those suffering from mental illness or emotional crisis is prohibited, except when an objectively reasonable person would believe that immediate and serious bodily harm to a person or persons is about to occur, and then only to avoid the use of a higher level of force. Only one taser at a time may be intentionally used on a subject except where deadly force is authorized. After one standard taser cycle, 5 seconds, the officer shall reassess the situation to determine if subsequent cycles are necessary, including waiting for a reasonable amount of time to allow the subject to comply with the warning. Officers should evaluate their force options and give consideration to other force options if a taser is not effective after 2 cycles on the same person. Officers shall make every reasonable effort to attempt handcuffing during and between each taser cycle. Officers should avoid deployments of more than 2 taser cycles unless an objectively reasonable person would believe that immediate and serious bodily harm to a person or persons is about to occur, and then only to avoid the use of a higher level of force. If the taser is not effective after 3 cycles on the same person, it shall not be used again on that person. Except where deadly force would be authorized or where the officer has reasonable cause to believe there is an immediate risk of serious physical injury, officers shall not use tasers against A, visibly pregnant women, B, elderly persons, C, visibly frail persons, D, young children, E, individuals with obviously low body mass, and, except when deadly force would be authorized, tasers shall not be used when deployment may cause serious physical injury or death from situational hazards. This may include falling, drowning, or losing control of a motor vehicle or igniting a potentially explosive or flammable material or substance. The taser should not be used in an indiscriminate manner in situations involving a large crowd, example, parade assignments or special events. Officers are required to justify each application of a taser and why less intrusive levels of force were ineffective. Close quarters deployment in a range closer than 3 feet may not provide adequate probe spread, the distance between the probes, to allow the taser to function to its full effectiveness and should be avoided. The taser shall not be used to torment, elicit statements from, or to punish any individual. Prior to deploying a taser, an officer shall visually and physically confirm it is in fact a taser and not a firearm. Officers should be cognizant of the risk of positional asphyxia following a taser application and avoid using a restraint technique or position that would impair a subject's respiration, such as the subject being on his or her stomach. Once controlled in police custody, the subject should be continually monitored for any signs of distress. Officers shall summon medical aid whenever a subject has been struck with a taser. Officers shall not remove taser barbs or probes that are embedded in flesh. Only emergency medical response personnel shall remove taser barbs or probes that are embedded in flesh. Officers shall be certified on the use of tasers. Officers shall receive annual taser in-service training, including proficiency and policy changes, if any. Tom, did you have anything you want to say?
This is, again, a comprehensive evaluation that the subcommittee conducted. It's based upon best practices from both Seattle and New Orleans, approved by the Department of Justice. The only comment by the police advisors, similar to the comment on the last recommendation, is that they assert that the current policy and related training is consistent with this set of recommendations, and in fact, they assert may be more restrictive. So there's really no opposition. We would urge that it be passed.
I have, anybody have questions for Tom or for anybody? Laquita.
For the, that would be D, young children. What age are you making the recommendation for when you say young children, like under 16?
It's a good question. We didn't discuss that. I would suspect at least 12 would make sense. I don't know for sure.
That's what we have that rooted,
In our directive, it states children who are known to be or are obviously under the age of 12.
Under the age of 12?
I'm not sure that's the right age, but
It's not. It should be under 18.
Yeah.
A kid is a kid, and if somebody tased my kid, I would not think it was okay. So it should be children under the age of 18.
I would view that as a friendly amendment to make it 18.
Yeah, thank you.
V, had your hand up.
Yeah, I don't know if the can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know if the subcommittee did any research in terms of the brain development of a teenager, but and the introduction of that amount of amperage or voltage and/or voltage. But with that, I agree with Maria.
Okay. Philip?
So one thought that I just wanted to add in regards to the use of, would be using the taser during rain.
using the taser during the rain?
Yes, while it's raining.
Are there consequences to that?
No.
So the officers aren't in jeopardy at all?
There's only a certain amount of energy that comes from it, and it can't be amplified by rain. Could it potentially carry over? Like, so say I'm standing in a mud puddle or a small amount, maybe it can transfer over, but it's not going to increase the amount of energy that's being conducted.
So what if a person is wet and you tase them? Does that not affect the person if they're already wet from the rain? Because they've got water on their skin or right next to their skin on their clothing. Does that have an effect? I'm just wondering.
The potential is that it could, so if there's two probes in the skin, the electricity wants to travel the shortest distance. And so it's going to go between the two probes. Now, if you're wet, the potential is that it might spread slightly, I guess, but it's still going to want to create that circuit. So it's not going to find its way all over the place and then back to the other probe. It's going to want to create the circuit so it goes the path of least resistance. So it may allow it to travel a little bit more easily, but it's not going to, again, amplify the energy that's present.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Ime, Bud, Tom.
I just have one question, and I don't know that any of our police supervisors can answer it, but I'm hoping. I'm wondering if there is research on the impact of 3 cycles of a taser on a single human being in a single incident.
So the impact of 3 cycles
Of a taser, since that's the maximum in this proposal that you could tase a person, I'm just wondering what the impact of that would be.
So where that came from is that's where the medical research is, or the data that was collected was 3 cycles, and they weren't able to get it any farther than that. Again, where we kind of go with it too is that where we go after 2, we're a little more limiting. And if it's not working after 2, one, you have to kind of look at why isn't it working? Is it the fact that one probe's not in the skin or on the clothing and the other one is? Well, yeah, it's a cycle, but it's not doing anything. It's not producing any energy, not giving any electricity towards the person. But if you get 2 probes in and 2 cycles and it's not working, it's time to start thinking about something different. But the 3 cycle thing, that's where the research was done, then it stopped at the 3 cycle mark.
So can you just say a little bit more about that? I understand that for the Portland Police, this is actually more cycles than you feel comfortable using, but my question is more about if you're using a taser and it's working, right? And for whatever reason, the decision is made to use it 3 times because within this policy as written, that could happen. What impact physically, mental health-wise, would that have on a person? Because I'm thinking about the times where people have been tased to the point where they continue to have tremors or flashbacks or other things, when in fact in those cases they didn't need to be tased that many times. So I'm just trying to understand if this is excessive or if it isn't. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So the determination of how to get to that many cycles, each cycle has to be reasonable and articulate on why you're giving that cycle. So the threat still has to be there. I think active aggression is the term. So that has to still be there. There also, how do we avoid getting to those higher cycles? It's the training and the policy that states that we want to try to do it during cycles. The policy almost kind of contradicts itself as well as the recommendations too, where it says you need to wait and give somebody time to comply in between cycles, but then it also says we want you to try to get them handcuffed during cycles. And the reason for that is that you have control of the person, and then you can get them under control. You can handcuff them, and then it lessens the potential that you have to give more cycles. Now, how somebody reacts from that, it's really kind of truly depends on the person. I don't know how to gauge what the reaction will be to them versus somebody else. versus a third person, it just is going to be different. The goal obviously being reduce the amount of cycles as much as we can, get the person in custody as quickly as you can to reduce the amount of force that's being used.
Okay, thank you.
It was Bud and then Tom.
So the original Department of Justice findings and then the settlement agreement raised ECWs as an area of special concern relating to their use with subjects in real or perceived mental health crisis. So my question for you is this: as I look at the existing policy in sections 2.1.4 and 2.2, the existing policy seems to attempt to prohibit the use of ECWs against those in real or perceived mental health crisis. So my question is this: are we saying, because I'm not seeing anything about that in our recommendation, and since that is an area of special focus for us, the question would be, are we saying that we feel what's in the policy today is adequate and needs no further elaboration, or is that something that we would intend to take up later, either through DSUFCS or MHCRS? I think, Tom, that would go to you.
Sounds like a question for Tom.
I don't think the subcommittee specifically discussed that. As with all the recommendations on force, we didn't mean to preclude anything in the existing policies that were good. It might make sense to add that to this recommendation. And if you want to propose some language, that would be a friendly amendment.
Thank you, Tom. But yeah, I think actually I will address it later. I think maybe MHCRS should help us out with that.
That's
but
fine.
It should come later. Thanks.
Ime, Tasha, and then Ime.
So I just wanted to bring something up, not really for discussion now, probably in a subcommittee on, and it's just a repeat of the same paragraph that was in the previous policy too, that talks about officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them. The de-escalation tool, that needs to be defined. A tool implies something physical, something I've been given to use. And so if you're going to use that term in a policy, I am going to guarantee you an officer is going to ask me, what tool did you give me? And so if you're going to say de-escalation tool, there should be some sort of definition as to what you're referring to.
Tom?
Well, there's already a fairly comprehensive and elaborate de-escalation policy and a recommendation that we approved, and that references tools of all sorts. Not necessarily physical tools, but words, time, those kinds of things.
I want to hear from, Rebecca Hanna.
I'm just curious if we could add techniques, tools and techniques.
That's a friendly amendment, sure.
Do we now have two friendly amendments to this? What was the first?
Changing the age to below 18.
Okay. I'd like to hear from Mr. Handelman, who signed up to speak on this one. Okay. And Nancy, you need to know we're down to 2 minutes for, okay.
Okay, Dan Handelman again, Portland Cop Watch. Just glad you have the discussion about the age of the person. There is a very controversial incident with a 12-year-old girl on a TriMet platform in 2009 that caused a lot of concern in the community. If this gets adopted, that won't happen again, I hope. Just want to make absolutely clear why it's very important that you're recommending to change the name, because the current name that the Police Bureau uses is an electronic control weapon, implying that the use of the taser is to control a person, and that's obviously a dubious question about whether or not that's the outcome of electrocuting somebody with 50,000 volts. So it's a much more neutral term to say electronic control weapon. There's a phrase that's in here. It's directly from the settlement agreement. I don't expect you to change it. I just need to comment on it because it says only one taser at a time can be used unless deadly force is authorized. It seems to me that once you use more than one taser at a time on somebody, that trips over into the torture area that you said is prohibited. And I think the question about the word tool is already been addressed, but to us, a weapon is the word that you should use for things like tasers and guns and beanbags and batons, and tools should include verbal techniques and the other things that were being described. Thank you.
Any more from the COAB? Ime.
I just wanted to point out that there is actually a paragraph on mental health issues in the proposal already.
There is a what?
There is a paragraph on page 72 on mental health issues. So I'm sure our committee can look at it more in depth, but just to know that it is in there, that the use of tasers for pain compliance against those suffering from mental health issues or emotional crisis is prohibited.
Nancy.
Police is a real controversial issue throughout the country. And the research that's been done, and the extent of the research that's been done, and the contractor that built them and promoted them is in question as well. And there have been several articles on that. So be cautious in concluding today. I mean, these are very good recommendations, but there have been studies prove that beyond 18, especially for a male, they are affected as well because their cellular development has not completed. And this was by a national expert in a trial recently that pointed this out. So I think we have to really carefully look at this and possibly bring in a national expert. We can get one easily and get a broader perspective, because I don't believe we should be using tasers. I think it's far too risky to life. How do you determine in a situation emotional stress caused by police officers, just by having the instrument? I mean, that wording in there is kind of subjective and uncertain. And I think it could be really tuned up a little better. And maybe that'll just require another set. I don't know how you do that, but I don't think it's satisfactory.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm going to hear from Jakari and from Vince, and then I'm going to call the vote. Okay, Jakari.
I didn't know who all's actually been tased ever before in the room. When people are speaking, you have, I have. So we got a lot of people speaking about tasers, but they've never actually experienced it. I have. It sucks. It's 5 seconds of just suck. So after the 5 seconds, I can move. Haven't been impacted or anything like that. I would much rather get tased than get punched or kicked or hit with a baton or shot with a beanbag, because that then is going to be a whole nother set of things. Taser, it locks you up, and basically it tires you out. It's just constricts your muscles, and then after that 5 seconds, I was done. I was a trainee, and I was ready to go home. I wanted to go home and go to bed. Yeah, it wore me out. So if I was thinking if I had been fighting with somebody and then I got tased, and after that 5 seconds, I didn't have the strength to keep on fighting. They're also with the recommendations and everything, yes, there's situations where after you tase someone, if they're up high on something, then that's clearly not going to be something that's reasonable, because that's going to really hurt them. But just having somebody, if someone's cutting on themselves and you're able to just run up and tase them and stop them and take that out of them, whether there's big 15, big 16-year-olds that I encounter, they look like they're 20, and you get up to them and you kind of see their eyes that, oh, they're a child, but they are big. In the end, it's 5 seconds. Much better than alternatives on trying to subdue someone that possibly is very violent or hurting themselves or others. So that's just my input, being tased before.
Okay, Vince.
Yes, as Jakari said, both of us have been tased, and it was an uncomfortable environment. But I have children, young kids, so I understand your concern. But an 18-year-old that weighs 230 pounds, what force do you want me to use on that individual? Do you think we're going to be able to de-escalate? Because we talk about de-escalation here. So you think that we're going to actually be able to de-escalate at this point with an 18-year-old?
It would be nice.
It would be nice, but it's not Do you think it's reasonable?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, are you still talking, Russia?
Okay. Maria?
So I think these are recommendations, and they're saying, like, to try and do these things.
Yes.
So maybe it can't happen every time if there's a humongous teenager, you don't know it's a teenager, even though I would think you would be asking for ID and finding out what was going on and investigating the whole situation before you draw a weapon.
Yes.
Okay, so then you would know that it was a kid. But even if things were so crazy and you didn't know what you were going to do and you used all of your de-escalation tactics and things kept escalating, like, use your best judgment. But these recommendations are saying to try to do these things because it sounds like what I'm getting out of them is that it's asking that you try to de-escalate situations before using these types of weapons. And especially on a child.
Well, of course.
And this, like, me reading over this is very disturbing, even to read about, like, things being inside of people's skin and, like, electrocuted. And, like, one of my good friends, and I know this is opinion, but one of my good friends was tased and went into a seizure and got really sick. And the police thought that she was just, you know, just having a fit and she wanted to fight because she was trying to, like, open herself up because she couldn't breathe and she was having a seizure. And they thought she was trying to fight them, so they continued to do things to her. And it was a woman as well with male officers. So these recommendations to me sound like they should be reasonable. People should, or officers should want to de-escalate as much as they can and using their tool techniques. You know, and the things that they can do to not have to pull these weapons. And if you have to, you have to. So, you know, I know that you have a job to do, but it's just saying, like, just try really hard to do something else first.
Okay, I'd like to call for the vote. Can I get a motion on this proposal?
For the friendly amendment, which?
There were two friendly amendments, and my assumption is they're included in the proposal. One is that the age be 18. That is, no one below 18 should be tased, if they can figure that out. The other was to add the word techniques to the word tools, so that we're talking both about those things that are hardware and those things that are software. Or questions?
So just to understand, Kathleen, we have to vote on the proposal in total with those friendly amendments, not on the friendly amendments individually, and then the proposal.
Unless you want to call it.
Unless you want to call for that, you can. But since they were friendly amendments and they were accepted by the chair, my assumption is we didn't need to do all that. V?
He has a question.
I don't know. Thank you. I don't know if this is an appropriate time for me to ask, but somebody just made the distinction about de-escalation tools and techniques, differentiating between the both of them. One being tools would be hardware.
Tools would, the issue that Lieutenant Hager raised was, if you said to an officer, I have given you these tools, the officer would say, what was the tool that you gave me, and expected something more concrete than verbal. Techniques can be how to use it, or how to use yourself, or how to use words, or approaches to things. And so the amendment was to add the word techniques so that it encompassed both possibilities.
Okay, I was just curious. I didn't know that there was de-escalation hard tools.
Yeah, that's what she said.
Okay?
Okay.
Yeah, that's what she said. Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Thank you.
No, I think they get it.
Thanks.
See, Adam?
It may already be kind of assumed, but I just wanted to offer the language regarding children, young children who are perceived to be under the age of 18.
That's great.
That's a friendly amendment.
And then I'd like to move to accept to
accept the proposal?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Unless somebody wants to if somebody wants to call to split off the friendly amendments and vote on those separately, please do that.
You got a second over here from Jimmy.
I'm sorry?
Second.
Okay. Are you okay, Bud?
I'm a little confused, but I'll try it. I'll call for the vote on the friendly amendment on the 18-year-old thing.
Okay. There's a question on the, I'm sorry, I messed this up.
Let me help you out here. The amendment has already been agreed upon within the proposal, so
That's
we
right.
agree with that agreement. We can vote on that proposal because the amendment's already within it. That's my understanding. If it's built in.
That was what I understood, that it was all one package now. And are you objecting to one of the amendments?
Myself, I can't vote for this proposal as long as it includes the 18-year-old language. I'd like to vote for the proposal, but I can't do it with that language in there. I think it requires us to use deadly force against people under the age of 18. And
It says, except where deadly force be authorized or where the officer has reasonable cause to believe there's an immediate risk of serious physical injury, the officer shall not use tasers again. So it doesn't prohibit the use of certain
Hold on. What is it that you're thinking this is saying, Bud?
if I understood it, we're asking to prohibit, except under exigent circumstances, we're trying to prohibit the use of ECWs or CEWs on people under the age of 18 rather than the existing de facto standard of 12 years old. Is that a correct understanding of the friendly amendment?
That's what I heard.
Okay.
They want to increase
Yeah.
the age.
Yeah, I understand that. I don't agree.
Right.
That's an opinion then.
Okay.
And also, Kathleen, Bud brought up a good point, though. We do need to vote on the amendment first in this case, because if there are some
Yes, that's
people who
what-
oppose the
yes,
amendment
that's what
altogether,
I'm
now
trying
they're
to get clear.
forced to choose the other. Right.
Okay,
Okay.
so,
You don't have to.
Great.
Right. I mean, if no one seconds
So
my
I do
call,
propose to
then-
vote the amendment.
so there is a proposal to vote on the amendment having to do with 18-year-olds being the limit for the use of tasers. That is, people who appear to be 18 or under are not to have tasers used upon them except in extreme circumstances. That is a motion from Bud. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Rabbi Kahana has seconded the motion. All in favor of that motion, that is putting the 18-year-old limit on this, please. I'm going to call the roll. I'm sorry. Rabbi Kahana,
Sorry, could you restate what a yes or no vote means?
yes means that you agree with the 18-year-old age requirement.
No.
Okay. Then no. Okay. Siadam,
Yes.
Bud,
No.
Catherine,
No.
Abel, Jimmy,
Aye.
Ime,
Abstain.
Laquita,
Abstain.
Maria,
Yes.
V,
Yes.
Rochelle,
Aye.
Tom,
Yes.
Philip.
Yes.
I think the motion passes.
It fails.
Oh, it does?
7.
Okay. Well, the motion fails. So, we don't have the 18-year-old limit in here. So we're back to the 12, as I understand it.
Well, there's no definition currently. It says young children.
Okay, but Paul read something that said something about 12-year-olds.
That was straight out of our directive.
Okay, that was the first friendly amendment. Does somebody need to, or it's now unfriendly, I guess, somebody need to vote on the second friendly amendment that has to do with the addition of the word techniques to the word tools in terms of de-escalation. Can we incorporate that into the recommendation, the overall recommendation? Could I get a motion for that? I think we had a motion earlier. Ime, yes?
It's already in there.
Techniques is already in there.
Right, but it's already in there. It's not important, but having a 13-year-old being tased.
It's in there?
71, page 71.
Is it the same thing we were looking at?
So it's page 71, and it's about halfway down. It says, before resorting to the use of a taser, officers shall use all reasonable de-escalation techniques and tools which are available to them.
That's why I suggested it,
Yeah, yeah.
because it was already
Because it
there.
was in there.
Yeah. I withdraw my suggestion.
Okay, let's try one more time. What's left is the proposal that I took the time to read and that we've been discussing all this time.
Could you read it again? Just like
Yeah, right. It's like, it's not exactly Harry Potter. This is the proposal that has to do with the use of tasers. Is there any more discussion? And if there is, it can only have 1 minute from the COAB. Okay. We have the motion. Who made the motion? Somebody did. And who seconded it?
Second?
So I'm going to call the roll. Rabbi Kahana?
Aye.
Siadam?
Aye.
Bud?
Aye.
Catherine?
Aye.
Abel?
She was an aye.
Jimmy?
Aye.
Ime?
Aye.
Laquita?
Aye.
Maria?
Aye.
V?
Aye.
Rochelle?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
And Philip?
Aye.
So agreeable.
was Maria and Nate?
No,
I said aye.
she said aye. So the motion passes. I'm being really strict about time this evening, so now it's time for a break.
Taylor is creepy.
we discussed, or the board discussed and voted on the proposal having to do with the use of tasers. We've had a change in the outcome of the vote because Senator Gordley's vote had not been registered at the time. So, Amy, why don't you talk about that?
Sure. Wait for my microphone here. So the live stream that Senator Gordley is viewing at home is on a slight delay from what happens in the room. We have an allowance in our teleparticipation policy that if a member's vote is critical to the outcome, we do wait 3 minutes to hear that. And within those 3 minutes, I did hear from Senator Gordley, and she was a yes on that amendment. So the amendment does pass with 8 votes, which means we should revote on the final amended motion.
Okay. Or we should ask if there is a desire for a revote on the final. That's the option here. So, did you understand what's happened? All right. So the friendly amendment is now really a friendly amendment and attached to the proposal. Okay. When you voted before, the proposal passed. The question now is whether you want to vote on the proposal again, and it sounds like maybe there are some people who may want to do that, given that the amendment passed. So I would need a motion to proceed.
I make a motion to proceed.
Okay. Second. A second from Philip. Okay. Where we are right now is we're re-voting on the proposal related to tasers that now incorporates the friendly amendment that sets the age at 18 years for use of a taser. It's been moved and seconded. I will call the roll. Rabbi Kahana had to leave. Siadam.
Yes.
Bud.
Aye.
Catherine.
Aye.
Abel.
She's a yes.
Jimmy.
Aye.
Ime.
Aye.
Laquita.
Aye.
Maria. V.
Yes.
Rochelle.
Yes.
Tom.
Aye.
Philip.
Yes.
Passed unanimously. Thank you very much for your time. Okay. So the second part of our meeting tonight is going to be, we have Amy Watson here from Chicago, and she's going to talk to us about stigma and other related topics. And I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, Amy, and talk a little bit about yourself, and then just tell us what you want us to know.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I promised Philip 30 seconds before we got into this part.
It's
Philip.
okay, and please excuse me. I just wanted to do a quick announcement before you took the floor, so if you don't mind. I just wanted to clarify for the public record and set the record straight, because at the last meeting, somebody had mentioned that Amanda Fritz had called the police when a person who was experiencing mental crisis, and I did a little bit of investigating on that, and it wasn't true. Amanda didn't call the police. She tried to interact with the person. So I wanted to clarify that story out of respect, and I just wanted to let you know. And thank you all, and Amy, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Philip.
Okay. So all of you know that I'm part of the COAB team, and you probably know I do a lot of work around police response to people with mental illness and CIT. What you may not know is that I've also spent a lot of time doing work related to stigma and mental illness. In fact, my dissertation was on public attitudes towards persons with mental illness. And then I spent 5 years working as the project director and co-investigator on the Chicago Consortium for Stigma Research, which was a group of people really looking at the stigma of mental illness and approaches to changing it. And I worked with Pat Corrigan, who is probably one of the world experts in mental illness stigma. So I'm not doing as much stigma work now in terms of research, but I still kind of keep my hand in there. So I thought I'd come and talk a little bit to the COAB and meeting attendees about mental illness stigma, and this is kind of part one. I believe at, is it the March meeting? February 25th, you're also going to have a panel of people talking about stigma as well from their personal experiences. So what I'm going to do tonight is just kind of talk a little bit about what stigma is, what we know about its impacts on people with mental illness, and what we know about changing it. And then at the end, if people have any questions, but then I move to just kind of an update of what the COCL team is doing in terms of some of the mental health components of the settlement agreement. So if people have questions about that as well. Okay. So I'm going to start out with a definition of stigma. And this is a definition I really like. It comes from Bruce Link and Joe Phelan at Columbia University. They're sociologists, and most of their work is on the stigma of mental illness, but this is a broader definition of stigma. And really, it's a process where people distinguish and label differences. So they notice that someone has a different trait or characteristic, and they associate negative stereotypes with that difference. And because of that, they sort of separate us from them. So they look at people with whatever that trait, label, or characteristic as sort of different. And along with that comes status loss and discrimination. All right, so, and that's a really important part of the process. And the way Bruce Link talks about this is we all know negative stereotypes about lawyers. Okay, people make lawyer jokes. But when you become a lawyer, you don't lose status and aren't really subject to social discrimination, okay? So that's where the difference comes in, is that you have sort of this labeled difference. Yeah, we have a lot of lawyers in the house, but, you know. But it doesn't. I mean, most, you know, you get your mother calling up and say, yeah, my son became a lawyer. That's a pride thing, even though there are stereotypes. So that's really the key piece. It's got this power thing where people sort of lose status in the community, and oftentimes there's barriers to many opportunities that they might have if they didn't have that label or that stigma attached. And one of the things when I worked with the Stigma Consortium is we were contacted by some groups that didn't want us to use the word stigma, because sort of the original definitions of stigma are a mark on a person. And so they thought that meant that the word implies there's something actually wrong with the person. And I'm going to use the word stigma tonight just for clarity, but also I see it as it's a mark on the person as seen by others, or the stigmatizer. So it's not necessarily owned by the person, but it's applied to that person. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. All right. So thinking about sort of that definition, and then we want to think about how does stigma operate in social situations. And so it starts out with people having these negative stereotypes about a group. For mental illness, there's a number of stereotypes that attach. And you end up with prejudice when someone sort of agrees with that belief and has a negative emotional reaction. So it could be anger, it could be fear, it could be disgust. And that leads to a behavior that would be discrimination. So it could be social avoidance, failure to provide opportunities, coercive or restrictive policies, dehumanizing language. There's just a whole array of different layers and domains where people may experience stigma. Because stigma can be direct in interpersonal interactions, but it could also be more general, could be more institutional and structural. So people may be impacted by discriminatory policies, where it's not the person who's actually implementing the policy may not hold that much stigma. But there's these structural things that also impact people with mental illness. And the other thing I want to say is, I'm talking about mental illness stigma, but understanding that many people, stigma can occur at the intersection of many different identities. So people may be experiencing stigma and various isms at the same time, and that can impact sort of their ability to shield themselves as well. But for simplicity, I'm focusing on mental illness stigma tonight. Okay, so in terms of the stereotypes about mental illness, we can all think of a bunch of them. We regularly hear jokes. Even, I mean, I work in the College of Social Work, and I hear my colleagues make jokes that sometimes just floor me. But there's many of them. But one of the biggest stereotype about mental illness is that people with mental illness are dangerous and they're unpredictable. And if you look at the data, basically there's a very, very small increase of risk of violence among a subgroup of people during a particular symptomatic period. So if you took a group of people with, even if you're talking about people that are experiencing psychosis, the risk of violence is not anywhere near, increased anywhere near as much as people perceive it to be. Most people with schizophrenia are not violent. Most people with other mental illnesses are not violent. And I think because we're exposed to, generally when we hear about somebody with schizophrenia, it's in conjunction with a media account that might be assuming the connection. But really, there's many people with schizophrenia. Most people with schizophrenia are not out there doing anything violent. They're living their lives the best they can, like everybody else. And I thought about I have an 8-minute video that I'll ask to put on the COAB website that it's Jeff Swanson from Duke University that posted a YouTube video after, I think it was the Navy Yard shooting, that really kind of goes through the numbers, looking at violence and what we mean by violence, who's perpetrating violence, and then looking at the connection with mental illness. And I think it does a really good job in a very sort of straightforward way. So hopefully we can put that on the COAB website. Other stereotypes could be that people are incompetent. Maybe they wouldn't be able to do the job. They might not be able to finish school. There's this belief that we have that maybe someone with a mental illness might not be as able to do the things that other people are doing. And again, we know that's not true either. People may experience significant disability at different periods of their illness, but that's not necessarily reflective of what their general ability is. Stereotypes that people may be to blame for their illness. How did they let this happen? Why can't they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps? That people with mental illness may not be as intelligent. They may be childlike. Also, another stereotype, or actually this was a clinician's illusion that carried through for a long time, is particularly people with psychotic disorders would have a relentless deteriorating course until they died. That used to be the belief of what the course of schizophrenia was. Until someone finally did some studies where they followed people for 30 years, and they realized that most people were able to manage and recover all or most of their functioning in the community. People still had periods of illness, but they didn't just get worse and worse until they die. And it wasn't until we actually had that 30-year data that people would really sit up and listen. And part of it is because clinicians see people when they're sick. When they get better, they go away. So they don't actually realize that what they're seeing isn't necessarily the whole universe of what people are experiencing. So we have better data on that now too. So that's, I'm sure you can think of other types of stereotypes people may have, and certainly they're around us in movies, in media, in advertising, in news stories. And it has a lot of impacts on people. Certainly it can impact people's ability to or their opportunities to participate in processes in decision making about their own lives, but also in civic participation. So if people discount their voice because they have a mental illness, and certainly I've seen people roll eyes sometimes about something like, oh, maybe this person doesn't really know what they're talking about. And I think that really is tied to stigma. Certainly people may have periods where they need assistance of other people in managing parts of their life when they're particularly ill, but that doesn't mean that they're not able to really participate in decisions at other times. People experience discrimination in housing. If you ever try to cite a group home for people with serious mental illness in the middle of an affluent suburb, you'll hear a lot about stigma. People are worried. That happened when I was writing my dissertation on mental illness stigma. Where I lived, they were going to put a group home in the county health department, and I had neighbors knocking on my door with petitions saying we don't want sex offenders in our neighborhood. And I was like, so people have very skewed understandings of what that means, and that really impacts a lot of things. It could impact me individually going to rent an apartment, or it could be where services can be cited for people. So people end up sometimes in the worst neighborhoods with the least opportunities to do the things they need to do really to get their life back. So it sort of has this compounding effect. There's certainly discrimination in education and employment. Many people, I've talked to faculty where I work that are sure that there's no students at our college with serious mental illness. I know they're wrong. We've had people go through our program and graduate and make fabulous contributions to the field. People experience stigma in medical services, in the criminal justice system, also just socially. If other people know someone has a mental illness, they may avoid them. They may not invite them to that after work drink party. So there's many situations where that stigma sort of attaches and can limit people's opportunities. And I decided tonight not to do a big list of studies and stats and stuff because I figured it's late, people are probably tired. But there's a lot of literature on this.
Can you include that in the PowerPoint, so if we wanted to look at it on the website?
I could put some resources on the website,
That'd be
certainly.
cool.
I mean, there's a number of good, relatively brief compilations.
Thanks.
So people may experience stigma in their day-to-day lives, but they also their lives can be limited by anticipated or experienced stigma. So I may worry that if I go and try to do this, I'm going to run into stigma, and maybe I might start avoiding and limiting my network a little bit to avoid really negative interactions with people. Or I might not tell people that, maybe I was out last week because I was really not doing well, and so then I cut off the ability to get support from other people because I'm worried what they'll think if I tell them why. But certainly people anticipate and experience stigma, and that creates a tremendous barrier to service access and utilization. Maybe someone doesn't want to become labeled as having a mental illness or being a service user, so they may avoid services until things get really bad. They also may limit the social settings they put themselves in, so they don't have to explain anything. They may choose not to pursue going to college. Certainly I've heard people being told, maybe you should lower your expectations a little bit, and they may decide at certain points in their life that they're not willing to take on the challenge of having to fight the stigma along with trying to pursue the goals that they have. People become very demoralized. There's a lot of literature on self-stigma as well, which really talks about how most people are diagnosed with a mental illness, late teens, early adulthood. So you live quite some time knowing what everybody thinks about what it means to have a mental illness. And you may believe those things because we live in a culture that promotes those images, and then suddenly it's true about you. So people can really have a lot of difficulty incorporating that into their identity, particularly if they buy into some of the false and negative stereotypes about what that means. Suddenly, does this mean I'm that way? So it can have a really, even if someone's not facing blatant stigma everywhere they go, they can really internalize it, and that can be really difficult for people to get through. And we're starting to see some interventions to help people with that too, but the problem really comes down to is that the problem with stigma is not theirs, it's a larger social problem. Okay? All right. Something that I like to point out when I talk about this, Pat Corrigan did a survey of people about places where they've experienced stigma and contexts where they've experienced stigma. And in the particular study that he did, one of the things that came up is 25% of the respondents indicated they had experienced significant stigma from clinicians. So mental health providers are certainly people that promote and perpetrate stigma. Not all of them. There's some very respectful, recovery-oriented services, but certainly there are times when it is very stigmatizing. The same percentage indicated that they experienced stigma from police officers. Okay, so now you've got mental health professionals and police officers sort of at the same rate, which when I tell this to mental health clinicians, they're shocked because they figured they'd have lower stigma. They'd be doing it less than police officers because we should know better, but we don't necessarily. And many people who are acting in a way that people experience as stigmatizing might not even be fully aware that they're stigmatizing because clinicians live in the same society, police officers live in the same society, they're surrounded by the same images, so certainly they could have the same negative stereotypes about mental illness. But I do think it's interesting that we saw that at the same rate of people reporting that, okay? So I actually have a study where we polled social work faculty on their attitudes about mental illness, just to kind of look at that to start moving forward what we can do there because I teach social work students that are going to go out and work with people. We're the largest professional group providing services to people with mental illness, yet we ourselves carry quite a bit of stigma with us. So I think that's important to address. So, so we have a problem with stigma. Sure.
If you don't mind if I'd like to interrupt, or should I wait until the end, or you can open it for questions? Okay, thank you. The percentage that you just came up with, the 25% in each category, those came from surveys, or what type of surveys and what kind of questions would result in those types of numbers?
It was a survey that was done a while ago. It wasn't necessarily a population sample, so exactly if it's representative of people's experience more broadly. And I have to go back, and I didn't actually work on that study, so I can't give you all the details. I could certainly pull it. I'm guessing if you did a sample in an urban area where people, you'd get different things depending on how you did the survey. The interesting part, I thought, was that people endorsed it the same amount for clinicians as they did for police officers. But I could certainly pull the study.
Okay, thank you.
So I don't think I have to try to convince anybody that there is stigma out there. And certainly it's hard not to be bombarded about it, and most people aren't trying to go out and harm people with mental illness. But because we live in a culture where it's just around, that people do it inadvertently. They make assumptions. They may make jokes. They may endorse things that they don't actually realize could be harmful, and things that are also untrue. So there's been a lot of work on how do you change it. I mean, how do you change? Did you have?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If I'm a black person who's in a mental health crisis, can I distinguish between stigma and prejudice or bias and bigotry? Are those all sort of the same thing with different facets? Are they, I mean, so I walk around and I feel stigmatized, and I think I feel it because I'm black a lot, but is there a difference, operational difference, between stigma, prejudice, bias, bigotry? Are they all related in some way?
I think they're related, and I mean, I don't know if someone has, if you're at the intersection of several different types, I don't know that you can always tease out what's operating where. I mean, there certainly is evidence that if your stigma attaches more strongly to African Americans with mental illness than if you're white. Certainly people that who are in the public mental health system have less shield from stigma, and of course that's tied to income, poverty, and resources. So many things compound, particularly for people in the public mental health system. And I mean, I've shared a little bit about this. I identify as a person with lived experience of mental illness, but I've always had the privilege of private services, so I've never been outed unless I outed myself. If you're getting public mental health services, there's many more situations where you're outed. And so it's harder to shield yourself. It's, I have less explaining to do. And that's not because of who I am as a person, it's who I was born as.
Okay, thank you.
I guess I can use this one. When you talk about self-stigma, is that, I guess, similar to what the question that Kathleen is asking, is that similar to similar to how stereotype threat operates?
To some extent, I think so. And one of the things that's different about the experience of mental illness stigma than perhaps racism is that if you're African American, chances are you grew up in an African American home where you may be facing more barriers, but you also may have learned coping skills to shield yourself. I'm not saying that mental illness stigma is worse, or bad. I'm not trying to say that, but there's a little bit different in terms of what you're raised and what skills you're raised to. For people who are diagnosed with a mental illness, maybe they have family that is very able to incorporate that and be supportive, but they may not have those same tools. They also may have the ability, though, to pass. I mean that's the one thing is there are times when you can avoid running into the stigma if nobody knows. So there's so many differences. Stereotype threat is more as I know I'm expected to do worse, and for some reason, something that triggers that, it's a little different.
Well, it's when that thing is recognized. So you know what I mean? So when I take a survey and my race is asked, I might perform differently than when I am not asked that. So when somebody's difference is brought up, does that affect how they might perform, whether it's at a job or some other?
Right, and certainly we actually tried to do some studies looking at stereotype threat of mental illness, and we've talked to a few other people too that have done it. It's really hard to trigger that one and measure it. So the studies didn't work out very well, so we didn't have anything conclusive to say about that.
You two are talking about stereotype threat, and I want one of you to say aloud what stereotype threat is. I mean, I know the studies and all that, but I'm not sure everybody does. And then after that, V has a question.
Do you want to, or you want me to?
I think you just defined it, actually. You just have to restate.
Right. It's basically the idea that if you're part of a group there's a stereotype that they won't perform as well in a certain task, and that attribute is triggered right before you have to perform the test, so you won't do as well. So if there's a stereotype that women do poorly on math tests, and so then you ask that question at the top of the test, then that should have an impact on their performance. So you would do the study where you'd only ask half the women that question at the top of the test, and the women that weren't asked, if stereotype threat is active there, if they weren't asked, they should do better than the women that were. And they can do that with race as well. So different attributes that have stereotypes attached to them if they're triggered.
Okay, and we had a hand from V and from Ime.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're giving this presentation. I'm wondering, I was listening to a couple of people just said what y'all were saying about stereotype threat. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about effectively the process of othering, which you have been, and then the outcomes and impacts of isolation, alienation, shame, and guilt.
I mean, in terms
in like a minute. I'm just kidding.
We do that regularly when we talk about people with mental illness as the mentally ill. It's that group that I'm not part of, which we could all be part of it at some point in our life. We have family members. So we other people in various ways, and it really makes it then that it's a little bit easier to dehumanize them and treat them more coercively, or to create barriers to their pursuing opportunities. So I think that's a big issue. And actually, on the other one of my last slides, I spend a lot of time talking to people about person-first language. So I do a lot of writing, and I write with other people who, I keep track changing through the mentally ill, particularly when I write with people from criminal justice. They just can't get it through their head. And I actually did something at University of Chicago, and their media person wrote a little story about it. He sent it to me, and I went through track changes and changed all of it, and I sent him a little explanation. And 2 weeks later, he sent me an article about a study that was just published in January, where they asked people, it was a community sample, clinicians, and students to answer a survey about attitudes about people with mental illness. Only they varied whether the question said people with mental illness or the mentally ill. When they said the mentally ill, the people endorsed more negative attitudes. So just that slight difference in language, the othering effect showed up in their study. So it just underlines the importance that how we talk about people sort of shapes how we think about them. And it seems minor. And one thing that really drives it home to me, my daughter has type 1 diabetes, and I went to something at her school when she was in 5th grade, and another parent came up to me and was like, oh, your kid's the diabetic. And I'm just like, she's my daughter, she's a kid. And it's the same thing. But we do it all the time where people talk about, the schizophrenic man. Well, it's a man who maybe has schizophrenia and lives with schizophrenia, and it really does matter. It really does. I spend a lot of time on my students' papers, and they try, and it's hard to shift how we talk. But it makes it really does make a difference. Okay, what was the other part of your question?
I think that's good.
Okay.
You got email down here.
Okay.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about intersectionality, right? So Kathleen's question was about racism or oppression based on other identities versus stigma. And I think what would be interesting to me is to look at that study that you're talking about where 25% of clinicians are seen as stereotyping their clients, which I don't doubt is probably underestimated.
Yeah.
But to look at that based on the intersections, because what we know is that people of color with mental health issues they are less likely to return to services, they have less access to multiple kinds of services, which you talked about a little bit. Their experience of stigma while seeking mental health services is often experienced through that lens of the intersection. And so there are studies on that. One of the most comprehensive people working in the field, as far as I'm concerned, is Alegria, and I can get you the first name, but
Maria.
Yeah. And there's a study that she presented here in Portland about how people, Asian Americans, African Americans, and Latinos each experience that first clinical encounter and what is necessary to feel like they're not being receiving disparate treatment. And so the way that they experience that disparate treatment may be interpreted as racism, it may be interpreted as mental health stigma. And so for me, that 25% then, my question becomes, how much of that is, is teased out? Like how much, when people say clinicians are not serving them, right, are making them feel stigmatized, how much of that is actually other oppression showing up in the room, not to distract from how much is actually mental health stigma all by itself, but rather to understand that those things compound in ways that make lots of people of color avoid services altogether. And that we actually need to think about that because here at the COAB, we've had lots of conversations and there's been lots of community conversations in the beginning about why we are talking so much about race as if race is separate from mental health issues. But people of color have mental health issues, and people of color who experience mental health issues have specific barriers to service. And that is very important for our work. So I don't know if you can get the oppressions part of that 25%.
I think that was very beautifully put. And, on the mental health provider side, I've talked to so many people that have gone for services and they've just been so turned off. And you're right, Leslie Snowden's done some studies too looking at if you're African American and you show up at an emergency room in crisis, you're more likely to get a schizophrenia diagnosis than a white person coming in presenting the same way who gets a depression diagnosis. So they're quicker to jump to the more serious, also more likely to do involuntary type treatment. And I don't know many people that want to show up to a doctor and suddenly lose control of what happens to them. And so why would people not go and to services? I mean, I don't like turning over control of my life to someone else. I mean, there could be a point where maybe I'm so ill that I'm not making good decisions, but people don't want to take that chance. Families don't want to take that chance because they're worried about how their loved one will be treated, and they might lose the ability to have an input in that process too. And I've even seen in Chicago, we've had some really horrible cases where families call for a mental health crisis, but they don't tell the call taker that their loved one has a mental illness because they're afraid to tell them. And it's not because they don't know. They don't want that in the record. They don't know what that's going to mean for what happens. And it's a very real fear. And I think we're going to be working on this for a long time, but we need to do a lot.
Absolutely.
It just kind of reminded me of a deal that Catherine and I actually experienced.
Yeah.
Where I brought that young girl that was Hispanic, and everyone kept thinking that she was intoxicated, but she had been actually given the date rape drug. And I kept advocating that there was something wrong, and no one was listening to me. Well, she's just drunk. She needs to go to detox. I'm like, no. She tried to hang herself in the back seat of the officer's car at detox. That's when they called, and we went to check her out. I was like, yeah, I think she needs to go to the hospital. Oh, she's just drunk. No, her memory's now coming back. Now she's curled up. Now she's saying crazy things. Well, what? Well, her father raped her. Finally get a hold of her mother out of state, and sure enough, her biological father was in prison for that. So you're having to do all these things to fight for somebody. Right. I don't know if it was because Catherine understands advocating for someone, that I understood that, I don't know, being just looked at maybe differently. I don't know. But it was just funny that she didn't want to deal with anyone but myself. And then I told her, hey, I know Catherine. She's going to take really good care of you. But I definitely saw that firsthand as far as, let's just get them out the door versus looking further in. And the fact that they can't even have a test to show if someone is given that drug.
Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question for Jakari. I was just wondering, when other police are doing that, being dismissive, saying she's just drunk, how do you educate them? How are you holding them accountable for their behavior?
That was the doctor. The officers were fighting for her.
It was the
I was told I need to take, that was the doctors.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was fighting
Okay,
the doctor.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's sad.
And the thing was, it wasn't just the fact that she had this PTSD, because I'm like, why are you trying to kill yourself tonight? Talk to her mother, who, she tried to do that right after her assault when her father did that. Well, why did you then try to kill yourself again tonight? Well, because something probably happened to her again that night. And it was taking a long time. I had to tell, hey, don't let anyone in the room. I'm now getting more and more of this information. I don't want anyone else to come in here because her memory's coming back. And people barged in the room. Okay, what's going on? We just drank too much. And I'm like, so it's frustrating. Like I said, I think that there's definitely something to the element that you are saying tonight.
Definitely.
So I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about what we know about what shows some promise for changing stigma. And you can kind of simply break them down into 3 different strategies that are often sometimes used together. So when they're used in practice, it's not quite as categorical. But there's 3 strategies that have been looked at in the literature. One of them is protest. So, and that's more commonly used against sort of negative media portrayals of people with mental illness or specific cases of discrimination. NAMI does a lot with stigma busters. I don't know how active that's been, but a few years ago it was very active in writing letters to media outlets, to companies that were advertising. I don't know, everybody's probably seen some of the Halloween costumes that are pretty stigmatizing, so they took on some of those places as well, and they've had some success. And this is a few years old, but it's, given that it's almost Valentine's Day, relevant. This was from Vermont Teddy Bear. One year they actually had their Valentine's teddy bear in a straitjacket. And so it was dressed in a white straitjacket embroidered with a red heart. This bear's a great gift for someone you're crazy about. He comes with a commitment report stating, can't eat, can't sleep, my heart's racing, diagnosis crazy for you. Trust us, she'll go nuts over this. It's kind of stigmatizing. And so Stigma Busters got on it. They wrote all sorts of letters. They got Vermont Teddy Bear to agree to not make any more of them. So they sold what they had. That went out. And apparently one of the top executives there actually sat on the board of a local psychiatric hospital too. So apparently he didn't figure that out in advance. But this is actually probably a pretty mild example. There's a lot of really horrific examples, stigmatizing examples. I can remember the Halloween costume, Annie Rexick, which is a recent one this year that was protested by a couple of groups. What we know about protest is, one, it can stop the behavior that you want. It can get companies to stop advertising in a certain way, but it doesn't necessarily change attitudes. Oftentimes it creates more of a pushback. So it won't necessarily decrease stigmatizing views, but it may remove some images or some particular practices. So it can be effective for that. Just you can't assume that it'll actually change somebody's attitudes about it. So it's useful in that sense. Doesn't necessarily increase what you want to see.
Yeah, it's much more like Caitlyn Jenner too. The same thing happened. People complained about the Halloween costume that was like Caitlyn Jenner's. And a lot of people wrote letters to the company to stop selling that costume. So just a similar concept.
Right. So you can get something removed, which overall is probably good because the fewer stigmatizing images that we're bombarded with, over time, that's a good thing. So that's useful there. Certainly it can be used for getting certain companies to change certain practices that may be stigmatizing. Not so much on the particular specific attitudes. But there's a lot of other interventions that work with educating people about mental illness. So where you go out and you provide information about what mental illness is, different mental illnesses, maybe a myths and facts type of presentation, talking about treatment. And what we know about education is it does tend to improve people's knowledge about mental illness, and it could improve their health literacy, but the impact of education alone doesn't necessarily have a lasting impact on attitudes. Okay, so short term, we've done some studies where we randomized people to different sort of presentations, and the one that was just education, they showed reductions in stigmatizing attitudes right after they participated, but you go a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, they sort of go back to their baseline. So it's not as durable. Although improving mental health literacy is a worthy goal in itself, it's not necessarily going to hit all of the attitudes. It is easy to disseminate, though. You can do videos, you can write articles, you can do that type of thing, so it's easy to get out there. So what works the best for reducing stigma is contact. And so contact could be a presentation where you have a panel of people that talk about their experiences and maybe answer questions and interact with the audience. That can be really powerful for changing attitudes, and that seems to stick, basically. That's a more durable change in people's attitudes because you actually kind of create some compassion and empathy and the understanding where it's not that other group. It reduces that othering piece. Contact could also be just if people are comfortable disclosing that they have a mental illness. So we all know people with mental illness, but we might not know they have a mental illness. So if people become more comfortable disclosing and people have those interactions and realize, wait, I'm just dealing with another person, that could go a long way as well. The downside of that is that there are risks for people disclosing in work situations, in school situations, in various social situations. So a blanket recommendation that everybody just indiscriminately disclose probably wouldn't make sense because there's negative impacts for people. But certainly doing sort of interventions where you have people that share their stories, doing it face-to-face is best. We've done some studies where we've compared that with video contact, where you provide a video of people talking about sort of what their experience is. Video works, it's just not quite as strong an effect as having real live in-person interactions with people. Written accounts can also have an impact. The real difficulty with it is that it's harder to disseminate widely. It's hard to get a panel We've talked about this actually in Chicago, where they're going to be running 11,000 officers through a mental health training. And we really wanted to have a contact piece of it. But that would be, I think they're going to run like 4 months, all 3 watches, 6 days a week. You need a panel that could do each one of those. It's not possible. It's just not going to happen. So we have to figure out some other ways of getting a piece of that into the training that they get. So they'll probably do something with videos. And if well done, it can have some of the effect, not all of the effect, that interactions with live people would have. So that can be difficult to disseminate. NAMI has a program that does this, so there are organizations that have structured programs to provide contact. NAMI has In Our Own Voice. They also do speakers bureaus, and there's other organizations that do this as well. Pat Corrigan, who I still do a little bit of work with, has a new program called Honest, Open, and Proud. And what it's designed to do is to help people with mental illness make decisions about disclosure. So it's not necessarily a training on how to disclose, but it's to make decisions, so if people choose to disclose, kind of helping them figure out how to do that, with the hopes that as more people become comfortable doing that, that will have an impact over time. But people really do struggle with who do they share things with, and what the impact may be. So really, contact is the way to go. I was at a meeting with the Stigma Consortium that we had the editor of Psychiatric Services at the meeting, Howard Goldman, and he talked about, well, we should just have a blue hat day where everybody that has a mental illness or has ever received mental health services wears a blue hat. And it was really funny because everybody looked around the room like, you first. But if we could do something like that so that people would realize that, it's not as scary as people think it is. It can certainly have a significant impact and create barriers for people that they struggle with, but it's not as scary, and it's actually more normal, whatever that means. It's more common. Many people struggle with mental illnesses of various types. And even, schizophrenia is a lower frequency than other things, but I know many people with schizophrenia that work, have families, have good lives, but you don't hear those stories. You don't hear about that. And if we get to a point where people do feel more comfortable, then people will know that. But right now, most people don't know that. So I think that's kind of the place to work, and I think your part 2 next week will actually be that, a panel of people sharing their own stories. And I think that's really, I think that'll be even more interesting, because people's stories are more interesting than a bunch of PowerPoint slides. I don't know if people have any questions. Oh, I have a couple more slides, but if you have questions, you can go ahead. Hi.
I'm sorry, it wasn't a public comment. I just wanted to add something. So I'm a peer. And
Hi, Ann.
Hi. And I've invited Tasha Hager to come to what's called Peer Apocalypse. There's about 300 peers that get together annually. And so we put a workshop proposal together to talk about, I've been volunteering with the police for 10 years, and Tasha's come in, Lieutenant Hager's come in later. So we've got to know each other, work together, and do some really good work together. So I made a proposal, and it was rejected, actually, by the peers. So what we're doing is actually we're going to have a special evening. So instead of a workshop, we're going to do an evening. So it goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about learning to all work together. I'm really happy to come in, and we're going to do a great job.
Go ahead.
If domestic violence is considered a form of mental illness in the police department, how important police has developed the skills for some cities have to address that issue and to open it up to full discussion rather than it not being talked about.
In terms of if domestic violence, I'm not sure if you mean the experience of the trauma of being in an abusive situation or if perpetrating, but in itself, neither one would be considered a mental illness, but certainly the impacts of that trauma could lead to people to having PTSD, various other types of mental health issues. So, but domestic violence in itself is not considered, and I can't really speak to the police bureaus.
If it's a culture problem within the police department, then you would think that there would be a question as to whether that officer can act in their own capacity as on the streets of Portland.
No, I'm thinking that the domestic violence is something that can be applied to the mental health issue with PTSD, maybe tremors, anxiety, different isolation feelings. That is a mental health issue, but with mental illness, I wouldn't necessarily say that. I would say mental health issue, not necessarily considering that person mentally ill, but that's how I approach it.
I'm hearing a bit of a different question from Nancy. It seems that what she's asking, and if I'm wrong, Nancy, you'll tell me, I'm sure, is what are the consequences of an officer engaged in domestic violence? What are the consequences to that officer? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. And how does that get managed within the police bureau? Is that what you're asking? Okay.
You want me to answer? Kathleen, I can take that.
Mm-hmm.
The process is quite simple. If we found that officers involved, or any member of the organization in the bureaus as a whole, are involved in domestic violence, there's an investigation and there's discipline up to termination. So that's very cut and dry. There's not a lot of speculation on that piece.
Okay. I had another hand over here. Ime?
I just wanted to make the distinction between people who are abusing their partner and people who are being abused by their partner, right?
Yeah.
So what I hear is the policy for people who are abusing their partner is that there's a process that's very cut and dry, that it can lead to termination. I'm wondering if Nancy's question is more about the impact of having police officers that have trauma out on the street. And I would argue that there are all kinds of traumas that police officers are experiencing by nature of their jobs, right? That there are things that they witness, there are things that decisions they have to make, et cetera, right, that could create trauma and trauma experiences. And I think that is something that we need to talk about, and how to support the mental health needs of police officers, which ultimately supports the mental health needs of the community. But I think those are two different things, right?
And I think there is a lot of movement now in looking at how we can support police officers. The International Association of Chiefs of Police is starting to look at it too. But certainly police officers are human beings that could experience mental health difficulties in their lifetime, plus their job exposes them to a lot more trauma than many people experience. So I think Amy's right. We need to look at what are the supports. What is it within a police? How can you help encourage officers who may be struggling to actually seek help? Because that's very difficult to do, because there's stigma within the police department too. That's a very difficult nut to crack, because there's several layers there, that they may be struggling. What does it mean if I ask for help? Does that mean I might lose my job? Which it shouldn't, but people may worry about that. So I think there's a lot that's being done now, but I think there's going to be a lot more movement, even nationally, in the next 5-10 years, in looking at that.
Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Ask the question and make a comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment and also ask a question about the stigma of mental health illness. At a recent trial that I was at, there was an Officer Baldwin. He had arrested a woman that he testified to, saying that he believed that she had a mental illness because she was asserting her Fifth Amendment rights loudly. And based on his hunch and his experience and the totality of his experience, he put her in handcuffs, because he said that he believed she had a mental illness, and people in that area on 82nd and Foster tend to have mental illness. He testified to saying that. So I think that ends up causing a lot of anxiety with the public when you have the police officers under the directives of a hunch and a ruse. Under a hunch, he thought that she had a mental illness because of his historical experience in that area. The police department exonerated him over and over under that belief that he believed that she had a mental illness. Or a mental health issue. I don't remember the exact wording that he used. But those directives are going to continue to hurt the public unless that type of wording is completely gone and not and the police don't have the ability to use that. And when you think about the totality of that experience, her experience and her reacting to not wanting to give the police her name out of fear, nobody took that into consideration as to the facts and totality. So I just wanted to make that comment. But my question is, I just wanted some clarity of the difference between a health issue and a mental health. I think it was Philip. I can't remember which. There were two different terms.
You're right. It's a mental health issue versus mentally ill or mental illness.
Yes, if you could please clarify that, what the difference are. Thank you.
If someone has a mental illness, basically the way it's diagnosed, people have to sort of meet certain criteria for a diagnosis. A mental health issue, you could have a mental health issue and not have a mental illness.
Right.
Does that make sense? Or so you could experience a mental health crisis, but not actually have a mental illness, because it's more of a
mental health crisis would be fear. Would that qualify? Like somebody is fearing for their life and
reactive depression.
I mean,
reactive depression.
It could be someone who may be feeling suicidal because some really horrible things just happened in their life, but they don't necessarily have an ongoing problem with depression or anxiety or something like that, but they're having a mental health crisis at that moment. And there certainly are people that have mental illnesses that periodically have mental health crises too. So I think that's sort of where the differences are. And in terms of, I don't know the case you were talking about. Generally, I mean, I don't think the directive says you can handcuff someone just because you suspect they have a mental illness. I think.
But that's what he testified.
Okay, so.
That's what he said on the stand under oath.
Okay, I don't believe that's what the directive doesn't say that.
It's
but
not a written directive because all the police officers mention the word hunch and ruse. So it is a directive under the Portland Police Bureau. Because it just seemed like every single officer understood that word.
Okay. This feels like last week's or the last meeting's conversation. I've got some more hands.
And it leads to police brutality.
Okay. I had V, then I have Jakari, Siadam, and Vince. And who? Oh, okay.
Dr. Watson, just real quickly, could you explicate the different types of mental illnesses, the classifications, class 1, class 2?
I mean, if you look at the DSM, and I'm actually, since I'm not a practicing clinician, I'm not quite as up on the DSM-5, which just came out, but there's only minor changes. But you tend to have affective disorders, which includes depression and bipolar disorder. So those are disorders of mood. So people either, if they're depression, it's low mood. If it's bipolar disorder, it's a combination of low and high moods of varying severity. You can have psychotic disorders, which include schizophrenia. With bipolar disorder, you can at times experience psychosis. With depression, at times you can experience psychosis. Not everybody that has depression experiences that, but it does happen. You have anxiety disorders. So you could have someone with generalized anxiety, so they generally experience higher levels of anxiety that impacts their functioning. You can have panic disorders. You can have PTSD. So it's basically the affective disorders, psychotic disorders and anxiety disorders. If you want to think about more broadly, you also have substance use disorders as well that oftentimes co-occur with other disorders or on their own, but if you think more about behavioral health. And when I think about what police are responding to, that comes into play because at the moment they're not necessarily making that determination of exactly what they're seeing. They're responding to the behavior and the situation that they're seeing and how they can de-escalate it. Is that?
Yeah, so it was affective, anxious, and
psychotic disorders.
Thank you.
Okay, I had Jakari Siadam, events, and then Keith.
I had a question as far as, did you guys look into maybe any stats as far as the police or, like the police being used as like a manipulation tool for someone that might be in having like a crisis issue or a mental illness, or even something where, you have like a domestic violence call and the aggressor actually calls the police, which happens a lot, and there's been actually a lot of training now for officers when you have the suspect is now trying to pretend to be the victim. And they're saying, oh, well, my wife's crazy and she's got all these issues and she might have depression or whatnot because she's in an abusive relationship. But you have to learn to see these signs and whatnot. I was just curious if you guys actually had any stats on something like that.
I haven't really seen anything, but as people become more mental health literate, some people will use that to their advantage and things. But yeah, I haven't really seen much literature, but it certainly I've heard that.
So I scribbled some notes, so I think bear with me. And this is more of a, I guess, a comment for the whole COAB and less a question. Or I guess a challenge for us. So we've talked a lot about intersectionality, and we know that our society is conditioned to assume and reinforce whiteness, straightness, and the lack of mental illness as a norm, and normalize that. And I guess as we continue to approach and respond to these issues that we're charged to take on, that we keep in perspective that if we approach this from a singular identity perspective, that we're also reinforcing this normativity and not actually serving all folks who experience mental health crisis. So I just want to continue to reinforce, to deliver that message in as many ways as I can over and over again. Because I think, I feel that as a sense of, some of the questions that we've had. I know there's not enough research about this. We're continually always going to be more statistically insignificant, and that's because so just to think about that as a complicating but also something that we need to continually address as we move forward in this work.
Vince.
I want to, in response to Dr. Watson's comments about police departments, are you aware that the Portland Police Bureau has an EAP assistance, employee assistance program that assists officers that have been through traumatic situations?
Mm-hmm.
You are? Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think most departments too, the hard part is getting office, at least, and I haven't looked at this closely in Portland at all, but in other places, it's hard to get officers sometimes to take that first step.
Right.
I mean, certainly there's some incidents where there's some required appointments after that.
Correct.
Right. Oftentimes, if someone's experienced a traumatic event, though, it might be 3, 6, 9 months out where they start experiencing sort of their reaction to it. And that's when it's really hard to get people to self-identify and say, help. Even putting the best programs, it's still a challenge.
You're the expert. I've been a policeman in police and law enforcement for 26 years, and I think the only other senior person in this room is Captain Marshman. Early in our careers, and I would like for you to make comments, Captain, yes, I think that was the prototype. That's how we were treated. Okay. You had to get through this.
Okay.
I don't feel that Jakari's era at all feels that way.
Okay.
They feel that when they need help, they need to get help. and we
really good thing.
encourage that they get help. And that's why we have those programs in place. But if you want to get us more help, please do. Thank you.
Okay. You had a comment you wanted?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say that I saw an article a while back with the police union chief, Daryl Turner, and this was in regards to a police officer involved with domestic violence issues with his wife. And he basically said that the officer really didn't have that big of a problem, other than that he didn't know how to choose his women. So that was kind of a disturbing, and you know, and I'm kind of wondering what the domestic violence rates are amongst the police in Portland, because I know overall nationally the rates are a lot higher amongst police officers.
Okay.
It's hard to measure.
I was kind of wondering too, isn't there a public commentary?
If I get to it, yeah.
Because that's pretty much the reason I came.
I'll give you a few minutes, in a few minutes. Vince? Huh? Not if I don't do what I'm doing. Vince?
Oh, to your comment, sir, yes, that comment was made by Daryl Turner. He's the president of the union. He's not the police chief. And that was his own comments. That does not mean that myself, Jakari, Tasha, Captain Marshman, Paul Meyer agree with that.
Well, I understand you're different people, but, you know, it still is pretty disturbing when you have a...
Your comment was generalization, so I just want to make sure we're clear on it.
All right, hold it.
Thank
the
you.
point here being that, and the point that I think Vince is trying to make is, the person that you quoted has no responsibility for setting policy
At all.
in terms of the police functions. He expressed an opinion. He expressed an opinion. He has a lot to do with negotiating a contract, which affects policy. I will agree. At this point, there's no resolution to this conversation, so I'm going to end it. I'm going to start trying to wrap this part up so that there is enough time for some public comment, and like to know, Amy, if there's more that you'd like for people to know, or anybody else on the COAB has a question. V.
I'd just like to thank Dr. Watson for sharing your expertise and your inputs and answering all the questions so forthrightly and fully. I really do appreciate your work.
Okay. I'm sorry that this waited till the end, but I am going to open it up for public comment. I'm going to keep you down to 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to go back to what Keith said. The union represents the police union represents every police officer out there. So if the president of the union is saying something that's bad, derogatory, or whatever, he's representing every police officer out there, and that's what I wanted to bring up.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Mike Schuman. I'm with Portland Cop Watch, and I've also been an attorney in Portland for pretty close to 40 years. I'm pretty much retired now. And I've had kind of a front seat at watching the police department and what's been going on in there. And the one thing that I notice is over all of those years, the same thing keeps happening over and over again. The police use excessive force. Officers are sometimes disciplined. They go into the discipline process. They appeal. They win the discipline. And the last one was just fairly amazing. Both the mayor and the police chief both said, we want this guy off the force. And he went through the process, and he was reinstated to the force. And the reason that you're here is to try and change that system, to make some rules that say that if an officer, that the rules are tight enough They're not just the totality of the circumstances win. They're, you have violated this rule and you have violated this rule, and the discipline is going to happen. And I'm hoping, beyond hope, that you do something. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kalei Lubin from Southwest Portland, concerned citizen. I wanted to bring up the fact that I can't even tell you how many times a phone call by someone in the public describes a person's behavior as weird, and it translates over a period of time to a fatality. The police are called because someone is weird, and the public is afraid of that weird person, that weirdness, and the consequences of stigma can be so devastating to our society that I would really like to thank you, Amy, for calling this to our attention and giving me the opportunity to say, I am so sorry that our community is so afraid of weirdness that we end up calling the police and end up with another fatality. We are here meeting on a good cause, and I'd like to wish us all very, very well.
Thank you, Kalei.
Police murder children. Police murder children because it's legal, because they get exonerated. They murder children. A 2-year-old was murdered in his living room. A police officer went up the stairs. He was answering a call. The store was open. He sees a baby on the floor. He shoots the baby dead. The baby had a pacifier. He thought the pacifier was a gun. When asked why he did that, he said it was his experience, his past experience, his historical experience in that area, that people there are aggressive. And even though he thought he saw a baby, he thought the baby had a gun, and he shot him dead. A 2-year-old. Police murder children. This police officer was exonerated. 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 Police murder children because they get exonerated. They kill children with a pacifier. A pacifier. They believe the pacifier was a weapon. It's not funny. It's real. The mother said had she known that the police were in the area, that had they turned on their lights and she would have seen him outside, she would have taken the baby, closed the door, taken the baby into the bathroom, and shielded herself in the bathtub. There is real fear of the police, of police aggression, police brutality, police murder children. Wake up. It is written in our laws. It is said when we exonerate police for murdering children, it's okay. We don't care. It's a little black child in a poor
Time's up,
neighborhood.
Laura.
Who cares?
Laura.
Police murder children.
I want to follow that up a little bit. The reason why we're, excuse me?
We have a child right back here. We have a child right
Yeah.
back.
Well, I just want to say that, we are here because there are some problems, Laura, and we are working desperately to solve them, or diligently, and that includes the police working to solve those problems, and I hope you'll take that into consideration. I don't, but I get to. All right. Well, leave the room. I want to point out that the police are working, the police.
You need to stop making commentary on my commentary.
I am going to talk for as long as I choose until this meeting is over. All right. Well, I can ask you to leave the room. Yes, I can ask you to leave.
I'm not going to leave. I can say over and over, please murder children because
police murder children. They murdered
Anyway.
2-year-olds. They murdered children.
Stop.
You don't want me
I'm
to say
sorry.
that, but
I'm
it's the
sorry.
truth. They
There's a
murdered
child-
children. You don't want me to say it, but it's the truth. They murdered children.
There is a child in
Because
this
they are
room.
exonerated.
Please.
Because they are exonerated.
Stop. Please stop.
They continue
You're being
murdering
asked,
children because
you're
they're
being
exonerated.
asked by the board to stop, and I'm asking you,
Stop making commentary on my commentary.
what I was talking to the COAB about was to recognize that we are all here working to solve some of the problems that have been raised in the comments this evening. And I think it is only respectful that we remember that, and that we are working together, to try to solve those problems.
You are dividing me from the COAB.
Stop.
Stop. Ask her to stop. Ask her to stop. Ask her to stop. Direct that to her.
I'm not going to stop. I'm the chair, and I get to
Laura.
talk.
Laura.
Yeah, we're
Laura,
about to end
Laura.
this meeting. We're about to end this meeting. It is now 8:19. If I'd like to have anything that the board would like to say before I adjourn this meeting.
He's not listening.
Laura.
He's not listening to us.
Laura.
Laura, he has a mother
Laura.
with him.
We're asking.
She can
Laura.
Stop. Let's move
Laura.
on. Okay.
Rochelle,
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
you don't get to tell Jakar what to do.
I'm doing it for him, not for you.
You can do what he want to do.
It's 8:19. We have about 10 minutes. If anybody would like to say anything or ask any more questions of Amy, anybody on the board, to ask any more questions of Amy or to make a comment about the COAB itself.
Excuse me, it's public comment time. I signed up and I haven't had a chance to.
Well, I haven't seen your name, Dan.
Well, I signed up on the sheet.
Okay, well, then, Dan, you get your 2 minutes.
Thank you. So again, I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I handed out earlier feedback. I don't know if you all saw that the COCL posted a response to all the input that came for the second quarterly report that was posted sometime around January 4th on the COCL website. And so we kind of responded to the response. We appreciate getting this kind of feedback because we don't get that all the time from the Bureau. And I kind of went through a bunch of points, some of which directly relate to your work. I'm not going to use my 2 minutes to talk about them because that's not enough time. The warning about the beanbag, the issue I realized wasn't that there isn't in there, it's that the warning that's currently written says stop or I'll shoot, and we think that it should say less lethal weapon somehow so that the other officers know that it's a threat to use a less lethal weapon so there's not contagious fire and that the officers use a real weapon when the less lethal is about to be fired. The issue about less lethal and tasers, in terms of the exception that I called out in the when I made a point of order saying that you can use it on certain people in extreme circumstances, I think those weapons probably have to have those circumstances at any rate because tasers have killed people and beanbag guns have killed people. So it's always, there's always a possibility it's a lethal weapon. But I'm not going to ask you to redo your recommendations. My understanding is the DOJ hasn't necessarily gotten the amended recommendations you already made, and I know you have them as a package, but especially because the time is slipping away, I would strongly recommend you send the finished recommendations to the DOJ that you have already voted on, rather than waiting for the end of the package. So, and that's, I just really think that's a good idea. Nobody's mentioned yet today is the 1-year anniversary of the COAB. Happy birthday. On the downside, you're supposed to have had 2 meetings with the chief and a meeting with the mayor by now, and that hasn't happened. So the city is now officially out of policy on those issues. And I know I'm not the decider on that, but it's very concerning to the community.
Time's up, Dan.
All right, well, I just feel I need to ask if any of my comments make you uncomfortable as a board, you need to let me know. I'm hearing it from somebody affiliated with your board, and I just want to make sure that the members of the board let me know if things that I say are somehow unhelpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
I did sign up for public comment. This is Reverend Luke Walters. I'm the representative of PAMI, which advises Disability Rights of Oregon, assigned to follow these proceedings. And it was suggested to me of a staff attorney at DRO that I ask the COAB board if it's possible to look at a recommendation to have persons obviously experiencing mental health crisis be able to be transported in ambulances rather than the traumatizing police cars with the hard seats and all of that. And in the paperwork that I picked up at the January 7th Mental Health Crisis Response Subcommittee meeting, I looked through all of this and I did not see any of that in here. I don't know if you've already addressed that or if there's talk of doing so in the future, but in procedure 870.20 under transports, it doesn't appear that the language is in there. And then in the next area on 630.40, there is some language about that in Code 1 and Code 3, but it's probably a good idea just to have people that are experiencing mental health crisis just have that care and that trauma-sensitive environment of the ambulance transport. So that comes from a staff attorney at Disability Rights of Oregon.
I think
Thank you.
that is being taken into consideration.
Appreciate that, Kathleen.
Okay.
So my name is David Keith Davis with Multnomah County Cop Watch and Fight the Sweeps Portland. Philip, I wanted to point out to you, you said that the information was incorrect about Amanda Fritz calling the police instead of behavioral health unit people during the arrest of Barry Joe Stull, S-T-U-L-L. Actually, she did call the police and cleared the chambers. I have the police report because I was arrested during that, and I'm currently facing trial. I was also tackled by a G4S security goon that's a former LA cop, Mike Cohen. The city of Portland has yet to release the surveillance footage to my lawyer, other than the altered, doctored version that shows the tackle midway where the security goon tackled me. But it'd be nice, Amanda Fritz and the city of Portland and you guys, if you can actually release the surveillance footage, which shows that G4S security, who's a personal security guard of the police commissioner / mayor, Charlie Hales, falsified a police report against me. I think that's pretty serious when the mayor's personal bodyguard and the bodyguard of Amanda Fritz and all the various people at City Hall is falsifying police charges against someone that's simply filming a man having a mental crisis in City Hall. And, you know.
Time's up.
You got anything to say about that, Amanda Fritz?
No, this is not the venue for that discussion. Thank you.
I think she's a grown woman. She can talk for herself.
We're going to end this meeting. And I'm going to try to end this meeting on a positive note. First of all, you're appreciated. You need to know it. Your work is important. And I hope that you'll remember that the hard part here is, well, let me say it this way. You know, we talk about holding hands and joining together and being together. That is not the hard part. The hard part is holding on once you've joined hands. That's the hard part. We're now doing the hard part, and we can do it. I would entertain a motion to close the meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your work.